Crystal chandeliers poured warm light onto white linens, turning every fork and wine glass into a small, sharp star. The rooftop restaurant floated high above Manhattan, where traffic looked like slow-moving embers, and the skyline pressed against the windows like a silent audience. The air carried expensive perfume, aged wine, and the faint metallic chill of night slipping in through the glass. Naomi Brooks moved through it all the way she had trained herself to move, quiet, efficient, nearly invisible. Her shoes made almost no sound on the polished floor. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her blouse was so clean it looked unreal against the chaos of spilled laughter and clinking ice. She balanced a tray of champagne flutes with practiced ease, fingers steady even when guests brushed past her without a glance. A table near the windows erupted in laughter, loud enough to bounce off the crystal and return as an echo. Naomi adjusted her grip, shifted her weight, and kept walking. She had learned the rhythms of this place the way other people learned songs. The rich wanted their bubbles refilled before they asked. They wanted plates cleared before they noticed crumbs. They wanted service that felt like magic, which meant they wanted the person providing it to disappear. She reached the service station and set down an empty tray. The stainless steel counter was cool under her palms. Behind her, the restaurant hummed in half a dozen languages. All of them carried casually, like accessories. She caught fragments without trying. A deal being celebrated, a marriage being repaired, a joke told at someone else's expense. A soft chime sounded near the host's stand. The doors opened again, but this time the room reacted before Naomi even looked. Conversation dipped, not to silence, but to a lower register. Chairs shifted. A couple of heads turned at once, the movement automatic, like birds sensing a shadow crossing the sun. Even the pianist, tucked into the corner beneath a wash of gold light, hesitated for a breath before his hands resumed with a brighter, sharper urgency. Edward Lansbury walked in as if he owned the air. He was tall and angular, silver hair combed back, a smile that showed teeth but no warmth. The kind of smile that belonged to people who did not practice kindness because the world had never required it of them. 4 bodyguards moved with him, not close enough to look protective, but close enough to look like a warning. Behind them came a cluster of men in tailored suits, their watches catching the light, their eyes scanning the room like they were assessing inventory. The hostess straightened so quickly it was almost a flinch. She took 2 steps forward, then froze in uncertainty, because men like Edward Lansbury did not wait to be welcomed. "Table 12, he said, not asking. Table 12 was reserved. Naomi knew because she had seen the seating chart earlier, the name written in neat block letters, a party arriving at 9. But the hostess did not argue. Her smile tightened at the edges as she gestured, already rearranging reality in her head. "Of course, Mr. Lansbury. Right this way." Edward crossed the dining room as if it were a hallway in his own home. Guests watched him the way people watched power, with interest, with caution, with the quiet calculation of whether it might ever turn toward them. He slid into his chair like he was taking a throne. His entourage fanned out around him, filling seats, pulling napkins onto laps, speaking in low tones that carried authority even when they whispered. Naomi felt the assignment before anyone said it aloud. She saw the way the servers avoided eye contact with the manager. She saw a busser pause, then step back as if giving up territory. She saw a senior waiter glance at Naomi and look away too quickly. Her section. She picked up a water pitcher and 2 menus, and approached with the same smooth pace she used for every table. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. Her face settled into the polite neutrality that made her easy to ignore, because being ignored was safer than being noticed. "Good evening, Mr. Lansbury," she said, stopping at the exact distance that signaled respect without familiarity. "Welcome." Edward looked up, and for a split second his eyes touched her face the way a hand touched glass. Not to feel it, just to confirm it was there. Then his attention slid past her, already bored. "Water, no ice," he said. Naomi tipped the pitcher and filled his glass. The water made a clean sound as it hit the crystal, a brief cascade that caught the chandelier light. Her hand did not shake. Her wrist stayed loose. Her fingers held the pitcher with a quiet strength that did not invite comment. "And tell the kitchen I want the chef to personally oversee my meal tonight," Edward added, voice carrying just enough to be heard beyond his table. None of this assembly line nonsense. One of the men beside him chuckled like it was charming. Another nodded as if this were wisdom. A third glanced around, checking who was listening. "Of course, sir," Naomi said. She set the menus down, aligning them with the edge of the table. Edward's gaze flicked to her hands and then away again. "That will be all," he said, dismissing her with a small motion of his fingers. A casual wave, like swatting a fly. Naomi stepped back. She turned smoothly and walked away, posture straight, shoulders relaxed. She could feel eyes on her, not because they cared who she was, but because they cared what might happen near him. The air around Edward Lansbury felt like weather. People sensed it. People adjusted to it. At the service station, Naomi set down the pitcher and reached for a stack of folded napkins. Her fingertips brushed fabric and found the familiar stiffness of paper hidden beneath her apron pocket. The edge of a hospital bill, folded into a tight square. It pressed into her skin like a reminder with corners. $100,000, her mind repeated. Not as a fantasy, but as arithmetic. Medications, copays, treatments with names that tasted like metal. Months of breathing room, a door cracked open in a life that had been closing for years. She did not let her face change. Across the room, Edward's laughter rose again, louder now. He was talking, performing, making the people around him smile because smiling was cheaper than disagreeing. Naomi watched him from the corner of her vision while she arranged silverware and checked table numbers, the way she always did. Her body stayed in motion because motion kept her grounded. Edward lifted his glass and took a sip of water like it was champagne. His eyes swept the room, searching for something to entertain him. When they landed on Naomi again, his smile sharpened. "A waitress who speaks French," he said, voice slicing through the ambient hum. Nearby conversations thinned as heads turned. A couple at the next table paused mid-bite. A phone appeared above a shoulder, angled casually, recording without permission the way the wealthy often did. Edward's gaze fixed on Naomi as if he had just noticed her existence and found it amusing. "What's next?" he said, dragging the moment out. "Sanskrit?" A ripple of laughter moved through his table, half nervous, half eager. It bounced off the chandeliers and returned as a brittle echo. Naomi felt the restaurant tilt, attention shifting toward her like a spotlight coming on. She took one slow breath. The bill in her pocket seemed to grow heavier. The water glass she had filled for him sat bright and innocent on white linen. The pianist kept playing, but softer now, as if even the music didn't want to interrupt. Naomi walked back to table 12 with the same measured pace, stopping beside Edward with her hands folded lightly at her waist. Her smile was polite, neutral, controlled. "I apologize if I overstepped, sir," she said. Edward leaned back, pleased with himself. "Oh, no apology needed," he said, projecting. "It's just surprising. Tell me, where did a waitress learn French? Community college? Online videos?" The laughter at his table came quicker this time, more confident. Naomi noticed the way a diplomat at a nearby table looked down at his plate, unwilling to be involved. She noticed the way a server lingered too far away, pretending not to hear. She felt heat rise under her skin, but she did not move. She did not flinch. Her father's face flashed in her mind for no reason she could name, a memory caught like light in glass. His calm voice, steady hands, the way he had once stood in rooms like this without needing to diminish anyone to be powerful. Naomi met Edward's eyes. Her gaze was level, not challenging, not submissive, just present. "I picked it up over the years," she said. "Simple, clean, no explanation." Edward's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned harder. He liked games that made people squirm. He did not like answers that gave him nothing to hook into. "You know what?" he said, warming to his cruelty like it was a fire. "This gives me an idea for some after-dinner entertainment." He reached into his wallet slowly, theatrically, pulling out a crisp bill and holding it up between two fingers like bait. "I'll give $50 to anyone on staff who can spell entrepreneur correctly," he announced. Silence hit the staff like a cold wave. A busser near the kitchen door stared at the floor. A hostess pretended to read something on her screen. A server's hand tightened around a tray. Edward laughed, loud and pleased. "Come on," he said. "Easy money. Anyone?" No one moved. His eyes returned to Naomi, sharper now, as if he had decided she would be the main event. "Actually," he said, voice lowering into something that sounded almost friendly, "I have a better idea." He leaned forward slightly, elbows near the table, as if sharing a secret, but his voice carried. "Tell you what," he said. "I'll give you $100,000 if you can serve me in Chinese. Mandarin. Right here. Right now." The room seemed to lose its breath. Even the pianist's music thinned to a thread, and for a moment it felt as if the city beyond the glass had paused too, headlights frozen, wind held. Naomi stood beside the table, still as a statue, the folded hospital bill pressing into her apron like a pulse. The number hung in the air, heavy and bright, both gift and insult, and every face that mattered turned toward her to see whether she would break. Edward watched her with a cruel, satisfied smile, certain the moment belonged to him. Naomi's fingers curled once, barely, then relaxed. Her eyes stayed on his, and she did not flinch. The room waited for her to become what Edward had decided she was. Naomi felt the pressure in small, physical ways. The heat from nearby candles, the thin bite of cold air leaking from the window seams, the weight of eyes that did not belong to her but still pinned her in place. Somewhere behind the bar, ice clinked in a shaker and then stopped, as if even the bartender had remembered to be quiet. Edward's smile widened when she didn't answer fast enough. Lia Chen appeared at his shoulder, moving with a manager's practiced calm. Her posture was composed, but her eyes cut quickly from Edward's face to Naomi's. A warning passed between them in a single glance. "Mr. Lansbury," Lia said, voice smooth as polished glass. "Perhaps we should focus on your dinner, your guests." Edward lifted a hand without looking at her. The gesture was lazy, dismissive, final. Lia's words died where they started. Naomi kept her hands lightly clasped in front of her. She could feel the folded hospital bill in her apron pocket as if it had edges made of wire. $100,000 was a number that could change the air in her apartment. It could change the smell of her mother's medicine cabinet from nearly empty to full. It could buy time, which was the only thing illness ever seemed to demand. Edward studied her like he was evaluating a gamble. He wanted her to lunge for the money or retreat from it. Either outcome was entertainment. Naomi let one slow breath pass through her nose. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the guests. She looked only at him. "I'll consider your generous offer, Mr. Lansbury," she said, voice even quiet enough to sound polite but clear enough to carry. A faint ripple moved through the room. Disappointment from people who wanted a spectacle. Confusion from people who expected surrender. Naomi continued without rushing. "For now, would you like to hear the evening's specials?" Edward blinked once. It was a small moment, the tiniest slip in his certainty. He had expected panic. He had expected defiance. He hadn't expected control. "The specials?" he repeated, as if the words were foreign. Then his mouth tilted back into a smirk he had to rebuild. "Fine. Make it quick." Naomi turned slightly, enough to include the entire table while still keeping Edward in her peripheral vision. She recited the specials with the same calm she used for any guest. Ingredients, preparation, the way the chef finished a sauce, the way a dish would arrive warm without being heavy. She kept it professional. Not dazzling, not meek, just precise. Edward's associates watched her with mild interest at first, then with something like curiosity. They had expected a waitress to stammer or apologize or fill the silence with nerves. Naomi gave them nothing to pity. When she finished, she waited. Edward tapped 2 fingers against his menu, a soft, impatient rhythm. "I'll have the smoked salmon eggs, Benedict," he said. "Replace the hollandaise with something lighter. I don't need that much butter this early in my life." A couple of his guests chuckled as if it were charming. Naomi wrote it down, pen moving smoothly across the pad. She took the other orders, each one delivered like a demand disguised as preference. She repeated them back once, calmly, to confirm. The act of confirming felt like reclaiming the room inch by inch. It forced Edward to listen to her voice without controlling it. "All right," Edward said finally, waving again. "Go!" Naomi stepped away, her back straight, her tray hand steady. As she walked toward the service station, she felt the restaurant's attention loosen slightly, like a cord relaxing. The pianist's playing grew fuller again. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed, though softer than before, like people were still listening for a second act. At the service station, Naomi set the order pad down and reached for a stack of clean napkins. The fabric was crisp, cool, calming. Her hands moved as they always did, fold, align, smooth because the body knew routines even when the mind was on fire. Leia appeared beside her, close enough that her voice didn't travel. "Naomi," she said, barely above a whisper, "don't engage. He does this to everyone. He enjoys it." Naomi kept her gaze on the napkins. "I'm not engaging," she replied softly. Leia's eyes held on her, sharp and assessing. "He can be vindictive." Naomi nodded once, slow. "I know," but her pulse hadn't slowed. Under the calm surface, something had shifted, subtle as a tectonic plate. Edward's offer had not just been money. It had been a public decision about what she was allowed to be. Naomi glanced toward table 12. Edward was speaking animatedly now, laughing with his guests, but his eyes followed her movement across the room like a hand on the back of her neck. He had noticed that she didn't fold. That made her interesting, dangerous, in his private language. A server brushed past Naomi with a tray and murmured, almost without moving his lips, "You okay?" Naomi gave him a small nod, the kind of nod that meant nothing and everything. She moved back into the dining room, carrying the next set of plates, the next set of refills. She served other tables with practiced warmth. A couple asked about wine pairings. A woman in pearls requested a different chair because the angle of the light wasn't flattering. Naomi handled it all with the same measured control. Yet she kept hearing Edward's voice as if it had left a residue in the air. 100,000. Mandarin. Right here. Right now. The words weren't just a challenge. They were a boundary line drawn in public. He wanted to place her on the far side of it and keep her there. At the edge of the room, a diplomat laughed at something his companion said, and Naomi caught the rhythm of French in the syllables. She understood it without effort, the way some people understood music. She didn't respond in French this time. She didn't give Edward another excuse. But withholding felt like shrinking, and shrinking felt like dying slowly. She caught her reflection in the dark window for half a second as she passed. Face calm, eyes steady, posture controlled. She looked like she belonged here, even if no one wanted her to. A low sound buzzed near her hip, her phone vibrating in her pocket. She didn't pull it out. She didn't need to. She already knew what it would be if she looked. A reminder, a bill, a date circled in red somewhere on paper. Money was time. Dignity was air. She moved back toward table 12 with a fresh water pitcher because it was her job, because routine was armor, because disappearing kept her safe. Edward lifted his glass without looking at her, assuming she would fill it. Naomi poured, the water clean and silent. As she set the pitcher down, Edward spoke without turning his head. "You didn't answer me," he said lightly. Naomi paused just long enough to make it a choice, not a reaction. "I answered, sir," she replied. "I said I would consider it." Edward finally looked up, eyes bright with the thrill of someone testing a lock. "And?" Naomi met his gaze. "And I'm working." A couple of his guests smiled as if this was amusing. Edward's jaw tightened slightly, almost imperceptible, then his smile returned. "Good," he said. "Work." He waved her away again. But this time, his wave didn't feel effortless. It felt like he was trying to convince the room he was still in control. Naomi walked away, and for the first time that night, the invisibility she wore didn't feel like protection. It felt like a costume she could take off. He didn't know it yet, she thought, her mind steadying around the idea the way hands steadied around a glass. He didn't know what she carried behind her quiet face. He didn't know whose daughter had just refused to flinch. Morning stripped the rooftop restaurant of its illusion. In daylight, the chandeliers looked less like stars and more like expensive hardware. The skyline was still there, but it felt flatter, like a photograph pressed against glass. Chairs sat in perfect rows waiting to be disturbed. The air smelled of lemon polish and coffee instead of perfume and wine. Naomi arrived early enough that the host's stand screens still showed loading circles. She moved through the quiet with the same controlled pace she used at night, but the silence made every sound sharper: the soft slap of her shoes, the faint hum of refrigeration behind the bar. The clink of metal as a dishwasher stacked clean cutlery. She had pressed her blouse until every crease disappeared. Her apron strings lay straight, tied firmly. Small preparations, but they steadied her. Laya Chen stood near the host stand, reviewing reservations with a pen held like a blade. She looked up when Naomi approached. "You're early," Laya said. "I want to be prepared," Naomi replied. She kept her tone neutral, as if the word prepared meant nothing beyond napkin folds and table settings. Laya's eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicious, just observant. "Mr. Lansbury has a private breakfast meeting." Naomi nodded once. "I saw." A pause held between them. The restaurant was quiet enough that Naomi could hear the espresso machine warming up, a low mechanical sigh. "You're volunteering," Laya said, more statement than question. "If that's acceptable," Naomi answered. Laya studied her, sharp eyes flicking over Naomi's posture, the steadiness in her hands, the composure that didn't match the word waitress the way some people expected it to. "Last night was uncomfortable," she said carefully. "Are you sure you want to put yourself in that position again?" Naomi met her gaze. "I'm sure." Something moved across Laya's expression, an almost invisible softening, like respect trying not to show itself. "All right," she said finally. "But be careful. He doesn't forgive people who make him look foolish." Naomi didn't argue. She simply nodded and stepped away to set her station. 2 hours later, the restaurant was awake. Coffee scent pushed into every corner. Sunlight poured across the white linens, highlighting every seam and every fingerprint someone forgot to wipe. Staff moved quietly, efficient, as if sound itself were a mistake. Edward Lansbury arrived without fanfare, which somehow made it worse. No dramatic hush, no pianist pausing, just the sudden presence of him, walking in with 3 men in tailored suits who carried the calm confidence of people who were used to deciding other people's futures. They took a private corner table by the windows. The light hit Edward's silver hair and made it look sharper, colder. He didn't look around the room. He didn't need to. Naomi approached with water and menus. Her pulse stayed steady, more out of discipline than comfort. "Coffee. Black," Edward said, not greeting her. His voice sounded unhurried, like someone who believed time belonged to him. "And tell the kitchen I want the smoked salmon eggs, Benedict. Replace the hollandaise with something lighter. I don't need that much butter this early." Naomi's pen moved across her pad. She could feel her fingers wanting to tighten, but she kept her grip loose. She turned slightly to include the table. "Good morning," she said, professional and calm. "May I confirm the order?" Edward didn't look up. He waved a hand as if granting permission. Naomi spoke in Mandarin. The change was not theatrical. It was clean, controlled, like switching a channel. Her tone was crisp and formal, the register appropriate for business, the rhythm natural. The words flowed without hesitation as she repeated Edward's order and the modifications, each detail placed with precision. For a half-second, the only sound was the soft scrape of a spoon against porcelain at a nearby table. Then, Edward's head snapped up. One of his associates froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. The oldest of the 3 men, gray at the temples, eyes too sharp to miss, nuance stilled completely, listening, understanding. "What was that?" Edward demanded. Naomi didn't flinch. She switched back to English with the same calm. "I was confirming your order, sir. Smoked salmon eggs, Benedict. Lighter sauce instead of hollandaise." "You were speaking Chinese," Edward said. It wasn't a question. The disbelief in his tone was edged with irritation, as if her competence were an inconvenience. "Yes, sir." Naomi held his gaze. "You mentioned you would pay $100,000 if I could serve you in Mandarin. I thought I should demonstrate that I can." The air between them tightened. Edward's smirk tried to return, but it didn't land the same way. He had expected a performance he could mock. What he got was something he couldn't dismiss without effort. "Cute trick," he said, voice sharpening, parroting back some phrases you memorized. Naomi didn't react. She lowered her eyes to her pad, the motion deliberate, not submissive. Then she began writing the order again, this time in Mandarin characters. Her pen moved with practiced strokes, confident lines, balanced spacing, the kind of handwriting that came from years of repetition and care. The characters formed cleanly, one after another, without hesitation. When she finished, she held the pad out not to Edward, but to the gray-templed associate. "Is this correct?" she asked in Mandarin, then repeated it in English. The man took the pad and read. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He looked at Naomi the way someone looked at a rare book they hadn't expected to find in a grocery store. "It's perfect," he said slowly. "Your characters are excellent. Where did you study?" Edward's jaw tightened. He reached for control the way some men reached for air. "That's enough," he cut in. "Just bring the food." Naomi nodded once and turned away. As she walked toward the kitchen, she could feel Edward's gaze drilling into her back, no longer amused. Measuring, recalculating. In the kitchen, the head chef accepted the ticket and glanced down at the characters. He blinked, then looked up at Naomi with a brief, amused disbelief. "What is this?" he asked. "Mr. Lansbury's order," Naomi said evenly. "Same as the English." The chef huffed a quiet laugh through his nose. "You're full of surprises." Naomi waited as the plates were prepared. The kitchen smelled of butter and smoked salmon, sharp citrus, hot metal. She focused on the sensory details because they kept her grounded. Laya appeared near the pass, arms folded loosely, eyes on Naomi. "That was bold," Laya said quietly. "It was honest," Naomi replied. Laya studied her for a beat, then her gaze flicked toward the dining room where Edward sat. "He looks unsettled," she murmured. "That doesn't happen often." Naomi didn't smile. "Good." Breakfast service moved forward, but the air at corner table had changed. Edward spoke less. His associates filled the silence with small talk that felt like paper covering a crack in glass. Naomi delivered the plates, set them down with the same careful precision, and stepped back. Edward ate in a controlled quiet, but his eyes rose more than once, tracking her movement as if he were trying to solve a problem that had started to resist him. When Naomi returned to clear the plates, Edward stopped her with a slight lift of his hand. This time, he looked directly at her. "Where did you really learn Mandarin?" he asked. Naomi's grip tightened around a plate for the smallest moment, then released. She kept her voice simple. "My father was a translator. He taught me." Edward's expression flickered something like discomfort trying to surface, then it vanished behind a colder mask. "Well," he said, voice smoothing out again. "Knowing a language or two doesn't change your station in life. Remember that." The words were meant to put her back where he wanted her. Naomi didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She gathered the plates and turned to leave. Behind her, she heard the gray-templed associate speak, low but clear enough to reach her. "That was unnecessary," the man said. "Even for you." Edward didn't answer. He only changed the subject back to business, forcing the conversation to move as if nothing had happened. Naomi walked away with the plates balanced in her hands and a new weight settling in her chest. Edward had seen her now. Not fully, not truly, but enough that he wouldn't forget, and enough that he would start looking. Dinner service returned with the familiar rush, but the restaurant felt subtly off balance, as if the floor had shifted a fraction and everyone was pretending it hadn't. Naomi moved through the tables with the same controlled precision, yet she could feel eyes lingering longer than they used to. Staff glanced at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Guests watched her hands when she poured water, as if fluency might spill out with it. Near the supply closet, two servers whispered too loudly. "Did you hear about this morning?" one murmured. "No, what?" "Mandarin. Like, real Mandarin." He looked furious. Naomi walked past them without changing her pace. The words followed anyway, sticking to her like static. At table 6, a young waiter named Marcus hovered beside a couple in their 40s, his face flushed with panic. The man at the table spoke quickly, frustration rising in his voice. His hands moved sharply as he pointed toward his plate, then toward his throat, then to the menu again. Marcus tried to smile, tried to calm him, but every attempt landed wrong. His fingers trembled around his notepad. Naomi recognized the language instantly. Arabic, fluent and urgent, the kind of urgency that came from fear rather than anger. She approached smoothly, stopping just close enough to be helpful, not intrusive. "May I help?" she asked Marcus quietly. Marcus exhaled like he had been holding his breath for minutes. "Please," he whispered. "I can't understand him. I think it's an allergy." Naomi turned to the guest and spoke in Arabic, her voice calm, her phrasing respectful. She matched his dialect with subtle precision, the kind that made people feel seen rather than translated. She explained that Marcus wanted to help but didn't speak Arabic, then asked the guest to tell her what he needed. The man's shoulders loosened immediately. Relief replaced irritation. He spoke quickly, pointing to the menu again, then tapping his chest. Severe shellfish allergy, Naomi understood. Cross-contamination fear, a request for a clean pan, clear confirmation from the kitchen. Naomi nodded and repeated it back to him in Arabic, slowing her cadence until his breathing matched hers. His wife watched Naomi with wide eyes, then softened into gratitude. Naomi turned to Marcus and translated in short, clear phrases. Shellfish allergy. No shrimp, no crab, no oyster sauce. He needs the kitchen to confirm clean prep. Marcus scribbled furiously, then nodded. Got it. Thank you, thank you. He hurried toward the kitchen, nearly running. The guest reached for Naomi's hand briefly, not touching, just hovering close in thanks. Thank you, he said in Arabic, voice thick with emotion. You saved us. Naomi offered a small smile. We'll take care of you, she replied. She turned away and saw Edward Lansbury. He stood about 10 feet away near the walkway that led toward the private corner tables. He wasn't seated. He wasn't laughing with associates. He was simply watching, still as a man reading a screen. The light from the chandeliers caught the edges of his face, making his expression harder to read, but the dismissal was gone. In its place sat something colder, sharper, calculation. Naomi felt the brief, instinctive urge to lower her eyes, to step aside, to become the shadow again. She didn't. Edward walked toward her slowly, as if he didn't want to spook whatever he had just discovered. That was Arabic, he said, tasting the word. Yes, sir, Naomi replied, tone steady. So, Edward continued, Mandarin and Arabic. His gaze moved over her face as if searching for seams. What else? Naomi held still. She could have listed them. She could have turned herself into a catalog, a party trick, a spectacle he could frame as his own discovery. Instead, she gave him only what she chose, enough to help when needed. A faint flicker passed over Edward's mouth, almost irritation, almost admiration, something unsettled. Who are you, really? I'm Naomi Brooks, she said. I work here. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, but it didn't soften. Nobody who speaks like that works as a waitress by choice. The comment landed because it was true, and because he said it like it was an accusation. Naomi kept her expression neutral. Life takes turns. Edward watched her for a long beat. The restaurant noise swelled and fell around them. A glass clinked somewhere behind Naomi. A fork scraped against porcelain. The pianist's music continued, but quieter now, as if it had leaned in too. Then Edward reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. I'm having my assistant look into your background, he said, thumb moving across the screen with sharp, impatient taps. I don't like mysteries in my establishment. Cold settled in Naomi's stomach, slow and heavy. She didn't let it reach her face. You're welcome to look, she said. I have nothing to hide. Edward's eyes narrowed, as if her calm offended him more than defiance would have. He slid the phone back into his pocket and stepped away without another word. But the threat remained in the air, hanging like smoke. Naomi returned to work with the same smoothness she always used, but the restaurant felt tighter now. The space between tables seemed narrower. The sound of laughter sounded sharper. Cameras from earlier tables appeared again, lifted casually, angled toward her as if she might do something worth capturing. She finished her shift past midnight. The staff door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Outside, the city noise hit like a wave horns, distant sirens, the rumble of the subway under asphalt. On the platform, fluorescent lights made everyone look tired and honest. Naomi stood among strangers, her hands empty, her shoulders tense beneath her coat. Edward's words repeated in her mind, not loud, but persistent. I don't like mysteries. The train arrived with a scream of metal. Naomi stepped inside and held the pole, feeling vibration travel through her bones as the cars lurched forward. By the time she reached Queens, the air smelled of fried food and wet concrete. She climbed the narrow stairwell to her apartment, each step echoing. She locked the door behind her and leaned her forehead briefly against the wood, letting herself breathe. The apartment was small and quiet, filled with the soft evidence of a life she used to have books stacked on makeshift shelves, sticky notes in different scripts, an old photograph of her father smiling in a suit she remembered too well. Naomi didn't turn on the main light. She moved to the table and opened her laptop, the screen glow washing her hands pale. If Edward's assistant looked, what would he find? Her university records, her withdrawn enrollment, her father's name Andre Brooks linked to international conferences, UN work, language projects, things she had tried not to think about because thinking about them felt like pressing on a bruise. Naomi clicked through old folders she hadn't opened in years, papers, presentations, photos of lecture halls and conference badges, a version of herself who had believed she was becoming something. Her cursor hovered over a folder labeled in plain text, Dad's work. She clicked. Files filled the screen, documents, scans, PDFs, names and dates she had never bothered to read closely. She had kept them like relics, not like evidence. Now the room felt colder. Naomi opened one file at random, a protocol document about multilingual communication and artificial intelligence, dated months before her father's death. The language was formal, institutional, the kind of document that pretended the stakes were purely academic. She scrolled down. At the bottom of the page, a signature block sat clean and final. Not her father's. Edward Lansbury. Naomi's fingers went still on the trackpad. The hum of the laptop fan seemed suddenly loud, like a warning. She stared at the name until the letters blurred, then blinked hard and opened another document, then another. Different project titles, similar themes, language systems, communication algorithms, funding notes. A pattern. Her throat tightened. Her pulse hit her ears. Why was Edward's name here? Naomi glanced at the clock on the microwave. 3 in the morning, the numbers glowing a sickly green. Outside, a car passed, headlights sliding briefly across her curtains like a searching eye. Naomi's mouth felt dry. She closed the laptop slowly, then opened it again as if that might change what she had seen. Edward wasn't just a bully in a restaurant. He was a thread tied to her father's work, and he had just ordered someone to pull on her life until it unraveled. Naomi sat back in her chair, staring at the screen's cold glow. Whatever game Edward thought he was playing, it was no longer just his. And she was no longer content to stay invisible. Sleep never really arrived. It circled Naomi like a stray cat outside a door, close enough to be felt, never close enough to be caught. By early morning, the apartment air had gone stale, warmed by the laptop's heat and the slow burn of her nerves. The city outside was still dark, but Queens was already waking in small sounds. A distant garbage truck, a neighbor's shower turning on, the muted slam of a front door somewhere down the hall. Naomi sat at her table with her elbows planted beside her father's framed photograph. The glass over the picture caught the laptop glow, turning his smile into something ghostly. She didn't play one of his recordings. She couldn't. His voice would make the ache too sharp, and she needed her mind clear. She reopened the folder again. The documents were dry, bureaucratic, meant to sound harmless, but the names and dates weren't harmless. They were proof that her father's work had lived in rooms she'd never been allowed into, and that Edward Lansbury's name had been close to it, too close. Naomi clicked through file after file, scanning footers, signature blocks, revision notes. Some pages were marked as final. Some had tracked changes locked down. Some were stamped with project identifiers she didn't fully understand. Her finger hovered over the trackpad as she scrolled. Then she saw it again. LB 2047. The code sat in the footer like a quiet fingerprint. Clean, repeated, unmistakable. On one document, it appeared beside a date stamp. On another, it appeared on a cover page labeled as a communications protocol for a multilingual AI initiative. It wasn't just one stray file. It was a system, a chain. Naomi leaned closer until the screen reflected in her eyes. The letters didn't mean anything on their own, but the repetition did. Her father had always told her that repetition in documents was never an accident. If a code appeared across multiple pages, it was a trail designed to be followed. She clicked open a PDF that looked older than the rest. The scan quality was slightly grainy, as if it had been printed and rescanned. The margins were wider. There were notes in pencil along the side, small, slanted marks that made Naomi's throat tighten because she recognized the rhythm of his handwriting, even when she couldn't read every word. She zoomed in. A note sat beside a paragraph about ethical implementation and humanitarian use cases. The pencil had dug into the paper slightly harder there, as if the writer had pressed down with insistence. Naomi's hand rose without thinking, fingertips hovering near the screen as if she could feel the groove through glass. Her father had fought for those words. She scrolled down to the signature area. Naomi Brooks. Her breath caught. Not typed, but signed. The signature she'd seen on birthday cards, on a lease application years ago, on her scholarship forms. A little flourish at the end, like he couldn't help making his name a little hopeful. Directly beneath it, another line. Edward Lansbury. Different stroke, different intention. Sharp, confident, final. Naomi stared at both names stacked on the same page and felt something cold settle into place inside her. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't Edward's name appearing near her father's by accident. This was proximity. This was contact. This was a door she hadn't known existed, one her father had walked through, carrying his work, his ethics, his belief that language was meant to connect, not to be owned. Her stomach clenched. She glanced at the clock again. The numbers had shifted forward without her permission. 3 in the morning. The hour made everything feel more dangerous, more brittle, like the world was thin enough to tear. Naomi rubbed her palms against her jeans and forced herself to breathe through her nose. Her pulse was loud in her ears. She thought of Edward's voice from the restaurant, the way he had said mysteries like it was a threat. If Edward's assistant was already pulling her records, he might find her father's name and make the same connection she was making now. But Edward had the power to act on it. Naomi clicked open another file. A short memo, mostly formal language, but with a line near the bottom that caught her eye. References to archived materials, stored under the project designation. LB 2047. There were notes beside it, faint, penciled, almost like an afterthought. If anything happens, archives. Naomi's throat tightened again. She zoomed in until the text became blocky. The pencil marks blurred, but the meaning stayed sharp enough to cut. Her father had anticipated risk. He had anticipated someone trying to reshape his work after he was gone. Naomi leaned back, chair creaking softly. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closer. She could hear the refrigerator cycling, the faint buzz of old wiring, the distant hiss of tires on wet street. She wasn't just tired. She was exposed. Her eyes flicked to the window. The curtains were drawn, but a thin slit near the edge let in a line of streetlight. It lay across the floor like a pale blade. Naomi closed the laptop halfway, then opened it again, as if closing it would give the documents time to rearrange themselves into something less real. They didn't. Her father's signature and Edward's signature remained stacked on the same page like a confession. A memory surfaced her father standing at the kitchen counter years ago, explaining a contract clause to her like it was a language puzzle. His voice had been gentle, but firm. Read the footers, Naomi. Look for what repeats. That's where the truth hides. Naomi swallowed. Her mouth tasted like stale coffee even though she hadn't had any. She began to organize. Not with panic, with method. She created a new folder and labeled it simply LB 2047. She copied the documents that carried the code. She saved screenshots of the signature pages. She noted dates in a plain text file, one line at a time, as if she were building a timeline her hands could hold when her mind started to spiral. Outside, somewhere in the building, someone's phone chimed, a soft notification sound that made Naomi's shoulders tense. She froze, listening. Nothing else followed. No knock. No footsteps in the hall, just the building settling, the city breathing. Naomi exhaled slowly and forced herself to keep moving. If Edward was already looking into her, she needed to know what he could find. And if her father had left a trail, she needed to grab it before someone else erased it. Her fingers moved faster now, but still precise. Drag, copy, save, rename, screenshot, timestamp. The laptop fan whirred louder, the sound steady and mechanical, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. When she finished the first pass, Naomi sat back and stared at the folder she had created. LB 2047, a code that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for her to look. She glanced at her father's photograph again. His eyes in the picture looked warm, patient, as if he had always known she would return to this part of herself when she was ready. Naomi's throat burned. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears blur the screen. Tears could come later. Not now. She closed the laptop gently and rested her hands on top of it, feeling the residual heat under her palms. In a few hours, she would have to go back into that restaurant and face Edward Lansbury again, knowing what she knew now. Knowing his name didn't just belong to a billionaire who enjoyed cruelty. It belonged to the signature beneath her father's. Naomi stared at the thin line of light beneath the curtain. The city was still there, still moving, still indifferent. But something had shifted in her. She had been living like survival was the only language she needed. Now she had another one: evidence. And she knew Edward would not like that kind of mystery at all. The restaurant felt staged before the first guest even arrived. Cameras sat in corners that were meant to look discreet but weren't. Black cases, coiled cables, small red lights blinking like eyes that never closed. Staff moved with a tighter kind of urgency, shoulders pulled back, smiles rehearsed. The air smelled of polished wood and citrus cleaner, layered beneath expensive cologne drifting in as the doors opened again and again. Laya's voice cut through the pre-service briefing, calm but edged. Tonight is an investor dinner. Journalists will be here. Everything needs to be flawless. Naomi tied her apron with steady hands. The knot held firm. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, an unread notification she didn't check. She didn't need to. Her mind was already full of footers, signatures, and the code she had copied into its own folder like a weapon wrapped in paper. A waitress beside her leaned in and whispered, "I heard he requested you." Naomi kept her gaze on the apron strings. "Then I'll do my job," she said quietly. The first wave of guests arrived in tailored suits and dresses that caught light like water. They filled the room with a soft roar of money laughter that came too easily, conversations that assumed agreement. A photographer adjusted a lens near the bar. A journalist with a notebook watched the room with sharp, hungry attention. Edward Lansbury entered at the center of it all, wearing confidence like it was custom-made. He didn't look tense. He didn't look worried. He looked entertained. His table was positioned where the room could not ignore him. A long stretch of linen, a thick cluster of glassware, a centerpiece low enough to keep sightlines open. Around him sat guests whose accents and posture marked them as people used to moving capital across borders. Chinese investors in dark suits, a Russian partner whose smile never reached his eyes, 3 representatives from a Middle Eastern fund who spoke softly to each other in measured tones. Edward lifted a hand, and the room's attention shifted toward him like iron filings toward a magnet. Naomi approached with water and menus, her steps controlled, her posture calm. The cameras tracked movement without making it obvious. She could feel them anyway. That faint pressure in the air when a lens found your face. "Good evening, Mr. Lansbury," she said, voice neutral. Edward looked up and smiled as if greeting an old friend. It was the same smile that had mocked her before, but there was something new behind it now. Interest sharpened into intent. "Ah, Naomi," Edward said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Perfect timing." He gestured expansively to his guests, as if presenting a feature of the restaurant rather than a human being. "I was just telling everyone about our fascinating staff. So talented, so diverse." The way he said it made Naomi's skin prickle. She distributed menus, the paper edges brushing her fingertips. Glasses clinked as she poured water. The men at the table watched her hands. The journalists watched her face. Edward let the moment stretch until the room leaned toward it. "You know," he said, smiling wider, "I made a rather generous offer to our friend Naomi here the other night. $100,000 if she could serve me in Chinese." A few heads turned from other tables. Phones rose casually, angled toward the long table. The pianist softened his playing, as if instinctively making space for dialogue. Edward's eyes stayed on Naomi. She claimed she could speak Mandarin. "So tonight, with all of you as witnesses," he lifted his glass slightly, "let's see if she was telling the truth." The restaurant quieted. Not completely silent, but quiet in the way a crowd quiets when something is about to break. Edward leaned back, smirk settling into place. "Go ahead, Naomi. Take our orders in Mandarin. Let's see how fluent you really are." Naomi felt heat climb under her collarbone, the same heat she had learned to bury. She could feel her heart, steady but heavy, like a drum behind a closed door. The camera lights blinked. A server at a nearby station stopped moving entirely. She placed both hands lightly against her order pad, grounding herself. Her fingers touched the paper like it was a railing. Then she spoke. Mandarin, flawless and formal, her tone respectful, her cadence natural. She greeted the Chinese investors first, choosing a register that honored age and status without sounding rehearsed. She asked about preferences. She described the specials with precise, elegant phrasing, each dish painted in taste and texture. One investor answered her in Mandarin, a question slipped in like a test. Naomi responded without hesitation, shifting her accent subtly to match the regional pull in his vowels. The older woman with silver-streaked hair studied Naomi the way a jeweler studied a stone looking for flaws, finding none. Naomi's hands moved as she wrote, pen gliding. The characters formed cleanly, confident. The page filled with order notes in a script that didn't belong in Edward's narrative of her. A small reaction rippled through the table. Surprise, then respect. The Chinese guests exchanged quick glances, their posture easing. One of them smiled openly now, the expression not polite but genuine. Edward's smirk froze. It didn't disappear immediately. It just stopped evolving, trapped on his face like a mask that had begun to crack. The Russian businessman leaned toward Edward and muttered in English, low but sharp, "Her Mandarin is better than yours." A few nervous chuckles fluttered around the table and died quickly when Edward's eyes flashed. He couldn't let it stand. "Anyone can memorize phrases," Edward said, voice tightening. "Let's try something more challenging." He turned his head toward the Middle Eastern guests with performative generosity. "Arabic. Speak to them in Arabic." Naomi let a beat pass, just long enough for Edward to taste the possibility of her failing. Then she greeted the three men in Arabic, her voice smooth, formal, respectful. Her phrasing carried the weight of tradition without sounding theatrical. The eldest man straightened in his chair, his hand lifted slightly, palm to chest, answering her with a warmth that hadn't been there before. Naomi asked about allergies and preferences, translated menu details, recommended a dish prepared in a way that respected dietary restrictions without making a show of it. The men's expressions softened, their shoulders loosened. Phones rose higher at other tables. A camera lens adjusted and refocused. Naomi could hear the faint click of a shutter. Edward's jaw tightened harder. His fingers tapped once against the table, a sharp, impatient sound. A French guest at the far end laughed lightly and called out in French, "And do you speak French as well?" Naomi answered in French with effortless clarity, her tone refined, her manners impeccable. The French guest's eyebrows lifted. She answered again, this time catching a regional cadence and meeting it, the way a skilled musician matched a tempo. Someone else called out Spanish. Naomi responded, shifting into it as naturally as stepping through an open door. Another voice offered Russian like a dare. Naomi turned, calm, and replied in Russian with a concise sharpness that made the Russian businessman blink once, then smile. The room began to change shape around her. What Edward had staged as humiliation became something else, an unplanned demonstration of power that didn't belong to money. The spotlight moved away from him and landed on her, and he could feel it happening because the room was his ecosystem. When attention shifted, it was like oxygen leaving his lungs. "Enough!" Edward snapped. His voice cracked like a whip. The room flinched, the sound cutting through the music. Even the phones paused mid-record. "This is impressive, I'm sure," Edward continued, forcing a smile that looked painful now. "But we're here for dinner, not a circus act." The insult hung in the air, sour as spilled wine. Naomi stood with her order pad in her hand, calm on the outside, pulse loud inside her ribs. She could see Edward's need beneath the words, to shrink her back down, to reduce her to something manageable again. But the guests had already seen what they had seen. The cameras had already captured what they had captured. Edward's eyes narrowed, calculating his next move, searching for a lever he could pull to regain control. And Naomi, standing in the center of the room's attention, felt the moment tighten like a breath being held right before something sharper was about to be placed in her hands. Edward's smile didn't return this time. It tightened into something that looked like control but wasn't. He reached into a leather briefcase beside his chair, the movement sharp enough to snap attention back to him. The briefcase clasp clicked open, loud in the sudden quiet. He slid a document across the linen toward Naomi like a dealer pushing the final card. "Translate this," he said. "Right here, right now." The paper stopped near the edge of her order pad. A waiter passing behind her slowed, then kept moving as if afraid sound might break the moment. A camera lens zoomed in. Naomi could hear the faint mechanical whir of it, like a small insect hovering. She picked up the document with both hands. The pages were heavier than standard printouts. Thick stock, the kind used when someone wanted something to feel official. Her fingertips caught a slight ridge where the pages had been clipped together, a bruise of pressure near the top corner. The first line was Mandarin, but not the kind spoken over dinner orders. It was formal, technical, written in a diplomatic register that lived in conference rooms and policy memos. Words like frameworks, protocols, and ethical deployment sat beside terms that belonged to machine learning and neural translation systems. Naomi's eyes moved quickly, automatically parsing meaning. And then, her blood went cold. The margins. Along the right side of the first page, faint pencil marks ran in short, slanted lines, small notes, an underline, a bracket that curved with a familiar impatience. The pencil had pressed harder in certain places, leaving grooves that caught the light when she tilted the page. Naomi's thumb froze on the paper. She knew those grooves. She knew the rhythm of that handwriting, the way she knew the shape of her own name. Her father's notes had always leaned slightly forward, as if the words were trying to reach the future. The room around her blurred at the edges, not from tears, but from focus. The only thing that felt real was the paper in her hands and the quiet pressure of dozens of eyes waiting for her to stumble. Edward watched her closely, his head tilted, predator curious. The checkbook appeared in his hand, snapped open with a practiced flick. Pen scratched, paper tore with a crisp rip. He slapped the check on the table like a stamp of ownership. 100,000, he said, loud enough for the cameras. "Just like I promised." The check lay there, bright and insulting on white linen, the ink still wet enough to shine. Naomi lifted her gaze briefly. Edward's eyes glittered. He wanted her to take it. He wanted the story to end with her gratitude, her silence, her compliance. But the document in her hands was a trap with teeth. "Problem?" Edward asked lightly. "Can't read it after all?" Naomi felt her throat tighten once. Then she forced it open. She lowered her eyes back to the page, letting her face go neutral. Professional. Boring. The mask she wore at work slid into place like armor. "I can read it," she said. She began translating aloud. Her voice was steady, measured, clear enough to carry across the table without sounding like a performance. She translated the technical concepts into crisp English, how the system mapped meaning across languages, how it accounted for cultural context, how it aimed to interpret not just words, but intent. She spoke like someone who understood the material, not like someone repeating memorized lines. A Chinese investor leaned forward slightly, listening. The journalist with the notebook stopped writing and stared. Even the Russian businessman, who had looked amused before, went still. Naomi turned a page. As she translated deeper into the document, she noticed what wasn't there. A section header referenced ethical safeguards, but the paragraphs beneath it were truncated. A footnote cited a framework, her father's framework, and then jumped abruptly to monetization language that didn't fit the tone. A transition felt wrong, like a sentence that had been cut mid-thought and glued back together by someone who didn't care how it sounded. Naomi's grip tightened on the paper. She loosened it again before anyone could see. She kept translating. Her eyes flicked to the bottom of a page. A signature line had been replaced. Where her father's name should have anchored the work, there was instead the clean, legal language of a patent application filed under Lansbury Tech. The formatting was pristine. The intent was not. Naomi's voice caught for the smallest fraction of a second, so brief most people would miss it. The closest cameras wouldn't. She steadied herself and finished the final section, translating the last paragraphs with the same calm clarity as if the document hadn't just reached into her chest and squeezed. When she was done, she set the pages down carefully. Not tossed, not dropped, placed. Her fingers released the paper as if it might burn. "The translation is complete," she said. Edward's smile returned, thin and satisfied, already preparing to frame this as a party trick he had purchased. Naomi kept her eyes on the document. "But this is incomplete." A ripple moved through the table. A few guests exchanged quick looks. The journalist's pen resumed, faster now. Edward's expression sharpened. "That's not your concern," he said. "You were asked to translate, not critique." Naomi's pulse hammered, but her tone stayed level. "I'm noting the original research was more comprehensive," she said. "There are sections missing." Edward leaned forward slightly, voice lowering into danger. "And how would you know that?" The question hung in the air like a blade. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath again. The pianist's music thinned until it was barely there. Naomi looked at the check on the table, $100,000 in ink, the number that could buy her mother time. The folded hospital bill pressed into her apron pocket, as if reminding her what silence cost. Then she looked at the margins again. Her father's pencil. His insistence. His care. Naomi raised her eyes to Edward. The cameras were close enough now that she could see her own reflection in one of the lenses. Face calm, shoulders straight, hands steady. She spoke clearly. "Because my father wrote this," she said. His name was Andre Brooks. For a beat, the room didn't move. A fork hovered mid-air at a neighboring table. A phone trembled slightly in someone's hand, still recording. The journalist stood, as if her body had decided this mattered before her mind did. Edward's face shifted surprise, then anger, then a cold calculation trying to rebuild control. "Your father was a consultant," Edward said sharply. "The intellectual property belongs to Lansbury Tech. We funded the research." Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Funding doesn't erase authorship," she replied, "and it doesn't give you the right to remove his ethical safeguards." The Chinese investors looked unsettled now, their expressions tightening as they absorbed what that meant. The Middle Eastern representatives exchanged a quiet sentence in Arabic, tone cautious. The Russian businessman's smile vanished. Edward's chair scraped back as he stood abruptly. The sound was harsh against the hush, like a door slamming. "This dinner is over," he snapped. "Everyone out." But no one moved, because the moment had stopped belonging to him. And Naomi, still standing with her hands lightly resting on her order pad, felt the air change. Not relief, not safety, something sharper and irreversible. A line had been crossed in public, and there was no walking back from it. The staff corridor behind the dining room smelled like bleach and hot metal. The walls were narrow, painted an off-white that never quite looked clean under fluorescent lights. Naomi's shoes echoed softly as she walked, the sound too loud in the sudden privacy. Laya guided her with a hand that hovered near Naomi's elbow without touching, not controlling anchoring. "Take your break," Laya said, voice low. "I'll handle the rest." Naomi nodded once. Her throat felt tight, as if she'd swallowed something sharp. She pushed through the staff room door, and the noise of the restaurant collapsed into a muted thrum behind it. Inside, the staff room was empty. A vending machine hummed in the corner. A plastic chair sat slightly crooked near a row of lockers. Naomi sank onto the bench, palms pressed against her thighs, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Her heartbeat slowed and then surged again, as if it couldn't decide whether the danger had passed. The door opened. Laya stepped inside and closed it firmly behind her. The click of the latch sounded final. She didn't speak right away. She sat beside Naomi, leaving enough space to respect her, close enough to support her. Naomi let out a thin breath that sounded almost like a laugh but had no humor in it. "I'm probably fired," she said. "Maybe," Laya replied. "Maybe not." Naomi stared at the floor tiles, the grout lines like small borders. That was either courage or stupidity. Laya's gaze stayed on her. "It was courage," she said, then paused, weighing her words. "Did you mean it? About your father?" Naomi swallowed. The image of the document sat behind her eyes like a bruise. "Every word," she said. "I didn't know he had it. I didn't understand how deep it went until I saw that paper." Laya exhaled slowly. The sound carried something old in it, recognition and regret. "I need to tell you something," she said. Naomi turned her head slightly. "I worked for Lansbury Tech. Laya continued. About 5 years ago, public relations. Naomi's eyes sharpened. You did. I left, Laya said, voice controlled. There was an ethics scandal. Edward acquired a small startup and claimed everything was legitimate. Patents, code, ideas. Her jaw tightened. The founders said he forced them out, then filed their work under his company's name. It settled out of court. Non-disclosure agreements everywhere. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere in the hallway, a cartwheel squeaked once and rolled away. Naomi felt cold spread through her arms. So he's done this before. Yes, Laya said. And he's good at it. He builds a story first, then makes facts fit inside it. Naomi's voice came out thin. How do I prove any of this? I'm just... Laya cut her off gently but firmly. You're not just anything. You're a linguistic scholar who speaks multiple languages and recognizes your father's work on sight. Don't let him reduce you. Naomi's eyes stung, but she blinked hard. I needed that job. I know, Laya said. And that's why he does it. He picks people with something to lose. A knock sounded at the door. Both women turned. Laya's posture tightened. Naomi's pulse jumped. The door opened a crack and a woman leaned in mid-30s. Sharp eyes, hair pulled back, a notebook tucked under her arm like a shield. I'm sorry, the woman said. I don't want to intrude. Laya didn't move. This is a staff area. I know, the woman replied, holding up a hand in a disarming gesture. My name is Clara Wells. I'm here covering the dinner. I saw what happened. Naomi's mouth went dry. You're with? The Times, Clara said, and pulled a business card from her pocket. She stepped forward slowly and offered it without pushing it into Naomi's space. Human interest most days. Corporate accountability when I can get it. Naomi stared at the card. The paper looked too clean for the mess in her head. Clara's voice softened. What he did to you was cruel. He staged that. And when you spoke up about the document, the entire room felt it. That wasn't just drama. That was something real. Naomi's hands clenched once and released. Real doesn't beat a billionaire. It can, Clara said. Not alone. Not overnight. But with evidence, witnesses, and timing, it can. Laya watched Clara carefully, then glanced at Naomi. A silent question. Do you want this? Naomi looked down at her lap. Her fingers were still trembling slightly. She thought about Edward's eyes when he realized she recognized the margins, the way his face had shifted from performance to threat. If he had stolen her father's work, he wouldn't stop at stealing. He would try to erase. Naomi lifted her eyes to Clara. Why would you help me? Clara's expression didn't flinch. Because I've been watching Edward Lansbury operate for years, and I've never been able to pin him down. Tonight you handed me a thread, and because you didn't come off like someone chasing money, you came off like someone protecting a legacy. Naomi's throat tightened. Legacy. The word hit harder than it should have, Clara added quietly. He will try to discredit you. That's his next move. If you want to survive that, you need to control the narrative with proof. Naomi's mind flashed to her laptop at home. The folder she'd created, the code in the footer, the signatures, the penciled notes that still felt like grooves under her fingertips. I have files, Naomi said slowly. My father's research notes, documents, audio recordings. I don't know if it's enough. Clara's eyes brightened. Not greed, focus. That's exactly what we need. Naomi hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. It was plain, unmarked, the kind people used for boring work presentations. But Naomi's grip on it was careful, protective, like it contained something living. I made copies, Naomi said, after I started seeing his name in my father's documents. Just in case. Clara's gaze sharpened. Just in case of what? Naomi swallowed. Just in case something happens to the originals. Or to me. Laya's expression tightened, as if she wanted to argue, but couldn't. Clara took the USB with both hands, as if accepting something fragile. I'll keep it secure, she said. And I'll document chain of custody when you gave it to me, where and when. Naomi nodded, a small relief slipping into her chest. Not safety, but a line of defense. Clara glanced at Laya. I'm going to step out and start making calls, she said. Naomi, if you're willing, I'd like to speak again properly, with time, somewhere safe. Naomi's voice came out quiet. I'm willing. Clara hesitated at the door, then looked back. One more thing, she said. The room was full of cameras tonight. That helps you. He can't pretend this never happened. After Clara left, silence settled again. The vending machine hummed. A faint vibration came through the wall, music from the dining room, resuming cautiously, like people trying to pretend they hadn't witnessed a fracture. Naomi stared at the empty space where the USB had been in her hand. Laya spoke softly. You did the right thing. Naomi's breath trembled. I don't feel like I did. That's because you're standing where the consequences are, Laya said. He stood there his whole life and never had to pay. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, another vibration, insistent. She pulled it out. A missed message notification was already appearing on the lock screen. Not from a friend. Not from family. From Dr. Hassan. Naomi's fingers hovered over the screen, her pulse rising again. The truth was moving now, and it wasn't going to slow down for her to catch her breath. Naomi didn't answer Dr. Hassan's message in the staff room. Not yet. Her fingers hovered above the screen, then lowered it slowly, as if the phone itself might set something off. Laya watched her. What is it? A professor from school, Naomi said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Laya's eyes narrowed. Someone you trust? Naomi hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. Then call him when you're home, Laya said. Not here. Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket. The fabric felt thin against the heat of it. By the time she left the hotel, the sidewalk outside was crowded with people who hadn't seen what just happened upstairs. Taxis sprayed slush. A couple laughed under an umbrella. The city moved like nothing had changed. But Naomi could feel the change under her skin. She rode the subway to Queens with her hands clasped around a pole, knuckles pale. Every time the train slowed, she expected her phone to vibrate again. When it finally did, the buzz shot straight through her chest. She waited until she was inside her apartment, the door locked, the chain in place, before she called Dr. Farouk Hassan back. He answered on the first ring. Naomi, he said, and the relief in his voice made her throat tighten. I saw something online, a video from the Lansbury Hotel. Was that you? Naomi stood beside her kitchen table, the same spot where she'd organized files in the dark hours. Her father's photo watched from the corner. She swallowed and began. She told him what had happened, what Edward demanded, what Naomi recognized, what she said out loud in front of cameras. She kept the story clean, factual, no speeches, no exaggeration, just the chain of events as they were. When she finished, the silence on the line stretched. Then Dr. Hassan spoke carefully. I need to tell you something. Naomi's spine tightened. What? I knew your father, Dr. Hassan said. Not intimately, but we crossed paths at conferences. He mentioned a project funded by a tech company. He was uneasy about it. Naomi felt her pulse climb. Uneasy how? He said they were more interested in commercial applications than humanitarian ones, Dr. Hassan replied. He wanted the technology to help refugees, immigrants, people who struggle with language barriers, but the company wanted licensing, market control. Naomi's fingers curled around the edge of her table. Did he say which company? Dr. Hassan hesitated. He didn't name it, but he described the CEO as a man who saw language as a commodity. Naomi closed her eyes for a beat. Edward's voice rose in her memory, polished and cruel. I built an empire by not accepting mediocrity. Based on what you've told me, Dr. Hassan continued, voice firmer now, I believe he was talking about Edward Lansbury. Naomi opened her eyes. Her apartment seemed smaller suddenly, the walls closer. Why didn't you tell me this before? I didn't connect it until tonight, Dr. Hassan said. And after your father's death, I assumed the project had been abandoned. Naomi, if Lansbury patented your father's work and removed the ethics framework, that isn't just immoral. It can be theft, it can be fraud, depending on funding. Naomi's mouth went dry. How do I prove it? The documents you have matter, Dr. Hassan said. But you need corroboration. Papers your father published. Emails, drafts, conference abstracts. Anything with dates. Anything that shows authorship and intent. Naomi's gaze dropped to her laptop. It sat closed on the table like a door she had been afraid to open too wide. I have audio files. Naomi said. He used to record notes for me. Sometimes he talked about his work. Good, Dr. Hassan replied immediately. Those recordings could help establish what he believed the project was meant for. Naomi's phone buzzed again while she was still on the call. She ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again, longer, like a warning. Dr. Hassan heard the pause. Are you alone? Yes, Naomi said, though the word tasted wrong. Then listen to me, he said, voice turning sharp with urgency. Edward Lansbury has resources. He will try to isolate you and discredit you. Do not meet him alone. Do not hand over originals. Back up everything. Naomi's throat tightened. I already gave a copy to a journalist. A beat of silence, then a careful exhale. That was wise, Dr. Hassan said. But you still need academic support. I can help. I have contacts. People who respected your father. They may speak up. Naomi stared at her father's photograph. His smile looked impossibly calm. Okay, she said softly. Okay. After she ended the call, the apartment felt too quiet. The city noise outside was muted by the window glass, distant and indifferent. Naomi opened her laptop. The screen glow washed her hands pale again. She created a folder labeled simply, Evidence. Inside it, subfolders formed quickly. Research notes, PDFs, emails, audio, screenshots, timeline. Her fingers moved with methodical urgency. Drag, copy, rename, save. She opened an audio folder labeled Dad. The file names were personal, soft, for when you doubt, keep going, graduation week. She hovered over them, then chose one that sounded neutral enough to keep her from breaking apart. A recording began. Her father's voice filled the room, warm, steady, older than Naomi remembered, as if time had changed it. He wasn't talking about her studies. He was talking about a project. Naomi's breath caught. They keep pushing for licensing terms, her father's voice said, slightly muffled like he'd recorded it late at night. They want to lock the model behind paywalls. I told them the humanitarian applications can't be an afterthought. Naomi's hand flew to the trackpad, pausing, rewinding. She listened again, ears straining for every word. I insisted on an ethics framework, he continued. It's non-negotiable. If they strip it out, the technology becomes a weapon for exclusion. Naomi's chest tightened until it hurt. She stopped the audio and opened another file, then another, scanning quickly, listening for anything that anchored dates, names, project labels. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. Naomi's fingers went cold as she unlocked the screen. A single line appeared. Stop spreading lies about Mr. Lansbury. You will regret it. No signature, no name. Her stomach dropped. She stared at the message until the letters blurred, then took a screenshot with shaking hands. The sound of the screenshot, sharp, artificial, felt like a small click of a safety latch. Naomi didn't delete it. She copied it into her evidence folder. She labeled it Threat 1. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. We know where you live. Naomi's breath went shallow. She forced herself to screenshot again. Save. Label Threat 2. She didn't call the number back. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened a blank document and started a new file. Chain of custody. She typed in clean, simple lines. Date, time, location, what was copied, where it was stored, who had access. She included the USB she'd given Clara, the copies on her cloud storage, the screenshots she was collecting now. The act of documenting steadied her. It turned fear into something structured. Naomi's hands were still trembling when her phone lit up with an incoming call. Unknown number. She let it ring out. Seconds later, another call. Then another. Her apartment felt suddenly exposed, like the walls were paper. Naomi stood and checked the deadbolt again, the chain again. Her fingers brushed the metal latch, cold and solid. She went back to the laptop and resumed copying files. Faster now, jaw clenched. Edward had wanted to control the narrative. He had wanted her quiet, small, grateful. Instead, he had triggered something he couldn't easily shut down. And with each screenshot, each timestamp, each file saved and labeled, Naomi felt the balance shift inch by inch away from his money and toward her proof. The buzzing stopped. The silence that followed was worse, because it felt like someone waiting. Naomi kept working anyway, eyes burning, body tense, building her case in the only language Edward couldn't buy: documentation. The headline hit before dawn. Naomi saw it on Clara's phone because she couldn't make herself open anything on her own screen yet. Her apartment was dim, curtains pulled tight, the only light a thin strip from the kitchen and the cold glow of a laptop that hadn't stopped running in 2 days. Clara sat at Naomi's table like she belonged there, coat still on, hair damp from the winter air. Her notebook lay open beside a paper cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. She turned her phone toward Naomi without ceremony, the waitress who spoke 9 languages and exposed a billionaire's theft. Below it, a photo. Naomi in her uniform, face calm, eyes steady. Edward's profile caught mid-turn, an expression between disbelief and fury. Naomi's stomach tightened, not from pride, but from the strange vertigo of being seen by strangers who didn't know the cost of visibility. Clara watched her carefully. "The audio is embedded," she said, "and I included the chain of custody note, exactly how I got it, when, where." Naomi nodded once. Her throat was too tight for words. Her phone exploded with notifications, messages stacking like falling tiles. Names she recognized, numbers she didn't. Social platforms she barely used. A wave of attention, heavy and indiscriminate. Clara's laptop chimed with an alert. Then another. "They're already picking it up," Clara murmured, eyes scanning. "Business outlets, tech blogs, someone at a morning show just reposted." Naomi forced herself to inhale slowly through her nose. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. Clara's coat brought in cold city air and a hint of perfume that wasn't expensive, just human. Her phone rang. "Dr. Hassan," Naomi answered on the first ring. "Naomi," he said, voice urgent but controlled. "Are you seeing this?" "Yes," Naomi replied. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I spoke with a contact," Dr. Hassan continued. "The UN archives. Your project designation, LB2047, is real, and there are filings connected to it. Original research, drafts, ethics appendices." Naomi's knees softened. She sat down hard on the chair, fingers gripping the table edge. "They exist." "They exist," Dr. Hassan confirmed. "And if the funding tied to humanitarian implementation was diverted to commercial use while those ethics components were removed, that is not just intellectual theft. It can trigger an inquiry." Naomi's eyes lifted to Clara. Clara's expression sharpened, absorbing every word without interrupting. "What does that mean?" Naomi asked. "It means government agencies may get involved," Dr. Hassan said. "It means Lansbury can't bury this under NDAs alone." Naomi's phone vibrated again, another call trying to break through. She ignored it. Dr. Hassan's voice softened. "You need to stay safe. Do not be alone. Do not meet anyone without witnesses." "I won't," Naomi said, though fear still sat in her chest like a stone. After she ended the call, Clara slid a printed sheet across the table, simple, typed, with bullet points. "Safety plan," Clara said. "Check-in times. Who knows where you are? Copies of your files stored in 2 places. One with me, one with Dr. Hassan, one with Laya if you're comfortable." Naomi stared at the paper. The structure of it made her breathe easier. "Leia already knows," Naomi said. Clara nodded. "Good." Outside the apartment window, the city was waking. Sirens, distant horns, the steady hiss of buses. The world didn't pause just because Naomi's life had cracked open. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Liar. Waitress scammer. You want money." Naomi stared at it without blinking. Her fingers moved automatically. Screenshot, save, label, discredit, attempt 1. Clara watched her do it and said quietly, "Keep everything." Another alert popped on Clara's laptop. Her eyes flicked across it, then she turned the screen slightly so Naomi could see. Lansbury Tech Issues Statement. Allegations false. Recording illegally obtained. Employee seeking financial gain. Naomi felt heat rise in her chest, sharp and bitter. "I was never his employee." "That's why it's sloppy," Clara said. "And why it's already backfiring. Commenters are posting your refusal of the check. People are dissecting the video frame by frame." Naomi's hands tightened together in her lap. She remembered the check on the linen, the ink shining, the temptation and the insult combined. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Leah. Naomi answered, and Leah's voice came through tight with adrenaline. "Have you seen the news?" "Yes," Naomi said. "They're panicking," Leah replied. "The hotel's executive group has been calling meetings all morning. Investors are calling. People are pulling away from him." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Panic had a sound even through a phone line. It was the sound of a man losing control. Leah continued, lower now. "Listen to me. Do not come back here alone. If you need anything from your locker, I'll get it." "And Naomi," her voice softened, "you did something that scared him. That means it mattered." Naomi's throat tightened. "I'm scared too." "I know," Leah said, "but you're not unprotected anymore. Not with eyes on him." When the call ended, Naomi sat in the quiet that followed. The apartment felt small, but no longer isolated. The story had left the room and entered the world. Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then looked up at Naomi with a grim half-smile. "He's holding a press conference." "Today?" Naomi asked. "Within the hour," Clara said. "He wants to get ahead of it." They watched it live on Clara's laptop. Edward stood behind a podium with his logo stamped across the front. His suit was perfect. His hair was combed back like armor. But his eyes looked different, more rigid, more cornered. "My company obtained all intellectual property through legal means," Edward said, voice measured. "We value the contributions of consultants, including the late Andre Brooks." A reporter shouted, "In the recording, you admit removing ethical guidelines. How is that legal?" Edward's jaw tightened. "That recording was obtained without consent. Its authenticity is under review." Another reporter cut in. "Are you denying you said those words?" Edward's smile twitched. Context was distorted. "This is an attack by a disgruntled former employee seeking financial gain." Naomi's hand clenched on the table so hard her fingernails pressed crescents into her skin. A different reporter pushed forward. "Naomi Brooks was not your employee. She refused the $100,000 check. How does that align with financial gain?" Edward's face flashed anger, then calculation. "We are exploring all legal remedies," he said, voice rising slightly. "This will be handled appropriately." The press conference began to unravel. Questions piled up faster than he could smooth them. He looked less like a king and more like a man trying to hold a door shut against a flood. Clara closed the laptop. "He's done," she said quietly. "Even if courts protect him, public opinion is already moving." Naomi stared at the dark screen reflection. She saw her own face in it, tired, pale, but not small. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Dr. Hassan. UN Ethics Committee, initiating inquiry into LB 2047. Naomi read it twice. The words didn't feel real until her lungs finally released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Clara leaned in. "What is it?" Naomi turned the phone toward her. Clara's eyes widened, then sharpened with focus. "That changes everything," Clara murmured. Naomi's hands started shaking again, not from fear this time, but from the sudden rush of possibility. Not vengeance, not spectacle, something cleaner. Acknowledgement. Her father's name, Andre Brooks, attached to truth in an official record, not just a memory inside her apartment. Naomi looked at the framed photo on the table. The glass caught morning light now, soft and pale. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, Naomi's world felt quieter in a new way. Not empty, but settled, like a storm passing far enough away that you could finally hear your own breathing. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt finished with hiding. Her phone buzzed once more. A notification from a social platform she rarely opened. A clip of her speaking, shared millions of times. The comments streamed too fast to read. Naomi closed the app without scrolling. She stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain back a few inches. Cold winter light spilled into the room. Cars moved below. People hurried with their collars up, speaking different languages into the air. Naomi rested her fingertips against the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the city's life. She didn't whisper. She didn't perform. She simply let herself exist in the light. Bridges outlast empires.